Beneath the roar of a stormy night, a battered soldier was thrown into a raging river. His life meant to vanish without a trace, but in the shadows by the old bridge. A lone German shepherd watched, scarred yet unbroken, driven by an instinct stronger than fear. What happened next was not chance, but a leap that turned despair into the spark of survival. From that moment, the dog's loyalty would change everything. How far can courage carried on four legs reach when darkness closes in? Watch the full story to discover the answer. Atlas was 5 years old, though his frame carried the history of a life that had not been measured by years alone. He bore the chest of strength, the stride of discipline, and yet his ribs showed beneath the fur where hunger had etched its signature. His coat was once a rich saddle of black and tan, now dulled by wind and weather, streaked with faint scars that told their own silent testimonies of nights survived and battles endured. To the passing eye, he was only another stray shepherd drifting along the forgotten edges of town. But those who lingered to watch him long enough might notice that his movements carried something more deliberate, as though he had appointed himself guardian of the overlooked corners of the world. The bridge was his chosen post, old steel beams rising above the river like weary bones, rust painting the bolts, shadows collecting in its underbelly where few dared to wander after dusk. Children who played nearby spoke of him as if he were a figure in a story, a creature that belonged neither fully to the wild nor to the human world. They called him the soldier dog, though none of them knew why he seemed to hold himself with such intent. Atlas returned no names, but his amber eyes carried a patience that suggested he understood what they whispered, and he never chased them away when they crept close to leave scraps of food at the edge of the grass. Every evening his routine began the same. He would nose along the alleyways near the marketplace, searching through discarded boxes and forgotten wrappers, his body lowering with practiced caution whenever footsteps approached. The hunger in his belly was constant, yet he never devoured everything he found. When he uncovered half a piece of bread or the last bites of chicken skin wrapped in paper, he would carry them back, head high, paws steady, to the tangle of roots beneath the willow that stretched at the riverbank. There, beneath the sweep of low branches, waited lives smaller and more fragile than his own. 2 kittens, still unsteady on their legs, peered up whenever his shadow returned. Their mother had disappeared weeks earlier, leaving them with cries too thin to reach mercy. Atlas placed the bread near them, tearing the meat into strips with careful teeth so the pieces would not choke their tiny throats. He lowered his head until his nose touched each trembling back, listening to the rhythm of their breathing, not leaving until they ate. At dawn, he would wander toward the trees lining the river path, nose lifted to scents most would ignore. Once he discovered a bird flailing on the ground, a fledgling sparrow thrown from the nest by the storm's wind. Its wings beat weakly, panic in its small body. Atlas nudged gently, lowering his muzzle to shield it from the chill. The bird's heart thumped against his fur like a frantic drum. He remained still, his body a barrier against the approaching cold until the sun touched the horizon. When the mother finally returned, flitting down in anxious bursts, Atlas stepped back, eyes steady, as though granting the fragile thing back to the sky. Those who passed the bridge late at night sometimes caught sight of him pacing, his figure cutting a dark silhouette against the muted glow of the river. They thought he searched only for food or a place to rest. Yet what guided him was more complex. Something born long ago when he had belonged to hands that treated him as a partner, not property. Though that life had ended, the memory had shaped him. Loyalty ingrained into marrow, protection woven into instinct. He had scars that proved this was no gentle path. A notch on his ear, a pale seam tracing his foreleg where barbed wire had once trapped him. Each mark was a story of struggle, but none had stolen from him the choice to guard. Other dogs in the neighborhood chased what was weaker than themselves. Rats, cats, the flutter of wings. But Atlas moved differently. He did not pursue for sport. He chose to defend. The children who lingered with their bicycles noticed it most clearly one summer afternoon. A group of boys had cornered a smaller mutt near the playground fence, laughing as they hurled sticks to drive it back. Before the mutt could bolt, Atlas appeared. His stride was silent, his body lowering into a line of determination. He placed himself between the mutt and the boys, his chest broad, his gaze fixed not with rage, but with unwavering command. The laughter faltered. None of the boys dared to test him. They scattered, leaving their game unfinished, and Atlas remained until the smaller dog disappeared into the safety of the alleys. Then he resumed his patrol, never glancing at the children who now whispered with awe. When night fell, he always returned to the underside of the bridge. The city's noises softened there. Water murmuring against stone, traffic above humming like a distant drum. Atlas would settle near the pillars, ears twitching, amber eyes half closed but never fully surrendered to sleep. His body was thin, his stomach often empty. Yet the air around him carried an authority that belonged to sentries who knew their ground. The kittens curled against one another, sheltered in the hollow of roots. The sparrows nested once more above the beams. And Atlas, scarred and lean, lay with his head on his paws, gaze fixed on the dark water. He was no master's dog anymore, no uniformed soldier's partner. Yet his posture betrayed that he had never abandoned the role imprinted into his bones. He guarded this territory as though every fragile life within its reach had been entrusted to him. It was not heroism as men measure it. It was not even choice in the way humans debate morality. It was simply Atlas being what he had always been made to be. The one who stands between weakness and harm, who carries silence like a shield and instinct like a vow. And though he did not know it yet, though the bridge above him was only steel and shadow, a night was coming when that vow would be tested beyond every scrap of hunger and every scar of survival. A night when the river itself would demand of him the full weight of his loyalty. For now, he closed his eyes against the rust-stained beams, body steady, breath even. But somewhere in the rhythm of his chest, in the steady drum of his heart, a story was already gathering, waiting for the sound of footsteps that would change everything. Nathan Cole had been many things in the short stretch of his adult years. He had been a son who grew up listening to the gravel of his father's voice teaching him to tie knots on an old fishing line. A boy who believed in the steadiness of water and the weight of duty. He had been a Marine, carrying the sharp scent of dust and oil across foreign soil, learning how to keep moving even when the world pressed its boot on his chest. And now, on this night beneath the humming bridge, he was a prisoner in the hands of men who smiled as if cruelty were nothing more than another transaction. His wrists burned where the rope dug into his skin. The knot was not sloppy, not the panicked improvisation of amateurs, but the calculated tie of someone who had bound more than one man in his time. Every tug stole blood from his hands. Every breath through the tape across his mouth tasted faintly of iron. His body ached from blows already given. A rib throbbed with the memory of a boot. His jaw pulsed with the bloom of a bruise. But his eyes, gray rinsed with a trace of blue, still hunted for angles. Nathan had never been the kind to surrender to despair. Even bound and gagged, he measured distances, the rail of the bridge, the turn of a shoulder, the chance, however slim, that a body could fall and still rise again. Damien Voss stood near the edge of the bridge as if it were his private balcony overlooking a stage prepared for him. His suit was cut from cloth that whispered wealth without the vulgarity of shouting it. The kind of fabric that moved with the body rather than against it. He was in his early 50s, tall with hair touched by silver in ways that suggested deliberate polish rather than time's erosion. To strangers, his face was handsome in a manner sharpened by symmetry, but the symmetry carried no warmth. It was the kind of beauty that judged rather than welcomed, a mask that smiled only when it sought to control. Damien's presence carried the stillness of a man accustomed to power obeyed at a whisper. In public, he was the benefactor, the donor at galas, the one whose name appeared on marble plaques in lobbies. Behind closed doors, he was the architect of ledgers that hid rivers of stolen money, the puppeteer who ensured anyone who threatened his empire disappeared quietly. Tonight, his eyes regarded Nathan not with fury, not even with hatred, but with the indifference of a man considering a problem already solved. Beside him waited Briggs Kellar, his silhouette thick against the dim glow of a streetlight. Briggs was younger, early 30s perhaps, with a neck that seemed carved from stone and shoulders that filled his windbreaker like a wall fills a frame. His face bore the memory of fists and fractures, the nose broken, set crooked, the eyes dark and unrevealing. He moved with the weight of someone who did not need to prove his strength anymore. Cruelty was not his pleasure, merely his profession, and he treated it with the same care as a craftsman sharpening a blade. The three of them stood as the night leaned heavier. The river below carried the sound of water striking stone, a low roar that hid secrets in its depths. The air smelled faintly of rust from the bridge beams, damp earth from the banks, and the sharp chemical trace of fear that Nathan could not disguise. Damien's voice broke the quiet. Smooth, unhurried, it rolled like smoke from lips that had rehearsed persuasion 1,000 times. "You know, Nathan," he said, eyes lingering on the current, "this city prides itself on balance. Concrete here, nature there. They say people stand on this bridge to breathe in calm." His gaze drifted to the churning water. "But everything calm is only force pretending to be polite." Nathan tried to draw breath through his nose, steadying himself against the tape, forcing the tremor in his chest into silence. He remembered deserts hotter than flame, the taste of dust on long marches, the drills where instructors screamed until silence became its own armor. He thought of his father's old fishing lessons, of the way his mother's laugh once cracked like glass when she surprised herself. The memories were fragments, but fragments kept a man upright when rope and pain conspired to pull him down. Briggs shifted, glancing at Damien for instruction. The signal was subtle, no more than a flicker of an eyebrow, but it carried the weight of finality. Briggs stepped closer to Nathan, heavy boots striking against steel. He set his hands where men like him had learned to set them, between the shoulder blades, above the kidneys, the perfect leverage point for a push that turned into a fall. Nathan's knees wavered, his breath quickened, but his eyes locked forward. He would not give Damien the satisfaction of fear laid bare. The river waited below, black and restless. Nathan understood what awaited him there, the cold grasp, the weight pressing against lungs already starved of air. Yet a corner of his mind refused to surrender. He measured again the rail's height, the tilt of his body, the fraction of a chance that the river might deliver survival rather than oblivion. Damien drew a phone from his pocket, glanced at a silent notification, and slipped it back without interest. To him, Nathan was already erased. A number struck from an account, a problem subtracted. He nodded once. Briggs tightened his grip. Nathan braced his boot against the lower rail, not to resist, but to control the moment. His shoulders angled, his mind speaking in fragments. If the water is sharp enough, it will wake me. If my lungs hold long enough, I will see the surface again. He looked past Damien to the far bank, ordinary trees standing in ordinary silence. And it was that ordinariness he cherished in the last heartbeat before the push. Briggs moved. The world tilted. Steel, air. The tearing sound of tape against skin stretched by grimace. Then the plunge. The water struck not like mercy, but like a fist, folding Nathan into its depth, dragging him down into the roar where light fractured into shards above. Above the bridge, Damien straightened his cuffs, indifferent to the violence that had unfolded. "No noise," he murmured, as though satisfied the order had been executed precisely. Briggs leaned over the rail, eyes scanning the water with the coolness of a craftsman examining his work. The river heaved once, swallowed and stilled. Neither man noticed the figure watching from the shadows of the embankment. A figure with amber eyes sharpened by instinct, a chest that tightened at the scent of fear and blood. A creature who had made the underside of the bridge his post. Atlas had been still, silent as the scene unfolded. But when the splash thundered and the ripples spread, something older than thought surged through him. His body rose, lean but steady, scars tightening against muscle. The soldier had fallen, and Atlas understood not the words of betrayal, not the contracts or the empire of deceit that had demanded this sacrifice, but the sound of a life being discarded. His paws dug into the soil, his chest heaved with the promise of motion, his eyes fixed on the place where the river had claimed a man who was not yet finished. The night shivered with the promise of what was about to unfold. Atlas had been still as stone when the struggle unfolded above, his body pressed low against the roots of the willow, every muscle taut with the silence of a sentinel. The night carried a blend of scents, the faint rust of the bridge steel, the damp breath of riverbank clay, and beneath it, sharper notes that pierced him like sparks, the coppery edge of blood, the sour smoke of fear, the heavy cologne of power worn too close to cruelty. He had learned long ago that every creature announced itself in layers, and the men on the bridge spoke louder in scent than in words. The first man smelled of steel and discipline, his breath shallow but controlled, his body marked by pain yet steady in defiance. Nathan Cole. Atlas did not know the name, but he recognized the pattern of a soldier's stance even in restraint. The second man, the tall one in the flawless suit, smelled of money pressed into paper, of polished shoes that had never touched dirt, of arrogance without sweat. Damien Voss. Atlas understood his type, if not his identity. The kind who never lifted their own hands to violence, yet carried the stench of it on their shadows. And the third, the heavy-shouldered brute, Briggs Keller, smelled of gym sweat dried into fabric and the old tang of anger worn like armor. Atlas's amber eyes followed every twitch, every lean, every flicker of muscle. His chest rose and fell in sharp rhythm. Then came the sound, the scrape of boots against steel, the brief grunt forced from Nathan's chest, the dull thud of flesh against railing, and the splash that split the river open. It was not the playful splash of stone skipping. It was the heavy crack of a body surrendered to gravity. The river closed over Nathan, and the echoes of the men above began to fade. Atlas did not wait. The push from his limbs was instant, born of marrow-deep instinct rather than thought. His claws ripped against dirt, scattering it in small sprays as his body launched forward. The bank was steep, but his paws had memorized every incline, every patch of mud, every jut of stone. He surged past the willow roots, his chest hammering, his ears flat against the roar of water. He leapt. The air caught him for a heartbeat, stretched into an eternity where silence screamed louder than noise. In that span, his body remembered rivers of another time, the shallows he once waded as a pup beside a kind hand, the training pools where he learned that water could be both friend and foe. His lungs locked in preparation. His eyes tracked the chaos below, not where Nathan had gone under, but where he would rise if life still clung to him. Impact. The river struck with the force of stone disguised as water. Cold muscle wrapped Atlas's chest, dragging him sideways, tumbling him end over end. His legs flailed once, then found rhythm. Kick, sweep, cut. His body remembered how to slice currents the way trout do, bending, twisting, finding seams in the chaos. He shook his head against the surge, ears stinging, and forced his eyes open. The world was a blur of green and black. Bubbles coiled around him like ghosts. He tasted silt on his tongue, metallic and bitter, and the scent of blood guided him like a thread in darkness. His chest burned, but he drove forward, angling left, then down, tracing not memory, but certainty. There, Nathan's body spun in the churn, limbs bound, chest convulsing in the desperate hunger for air. His eyes were half open, gray clouded by river water. The tape across his mouth bubbled faintly as he exhaled against it. For one sharp instant, Atlas saw not just a drowning man, but the shape of every fragile creature he had ever guarded. The kittens trembling under roots, the sparrow gasping in fallen grass, the mutt cornered by boys with sticks. This was the same story, told larger, told louder. But the vow was unchanged. Atlas surged closer, his body twisting into the pull of current. He snapped his jaws once, twice, until his teeth closed around fabric. The field shirt was soaked and torn, the fibers stubborn against the force of water, but his grip found the seam near the shoulder. He clenched, not with cruelty but with precision, a hold designed to pull without breaking. Nathan's body jerked. Panic flared in his movements, thrashing against the weight that gripped him. For a moment he believed the river itself had grown teeth, that death had come not only as water, but as a predator. His lungs screamed, his wrists tore against rope, his chest convulsed. Then, through the blur, his cheek brushed something alive, fur pressed wet and warm even against the cold. He turned his eyes and met amber locked with storm gray. In those eyes he saw intent, not hunger. He saw a creature that refused to let go. His panic broke just enough to allow surrender, the kind of surrender not to death, but to trust. Atlas kicked. His hind legs strained until his hips ached. His tail lashed for balance. His chest dragged Nathan upward inch by inch. The river fought back, a beast unwilling to yield its prey. It slammed them sideways into a rock, splitting pain across Nathan's ribs, knocking air from Atlas's lungs. But the shepherd adjusted, shifting his angle, cutting into the flow rather than against it. His body carved through current, a muscle-born answer to a problem older than thought. Nathan's head broke the surface for one blessed instant. Air seared his throat, burning as cruelly as the water had, yet he gulped it like treasure. A cough wrenched through him, muffled by tape, but he lived another breath. Atlas snarled against the pull, forcing his head higher, his teeth tightening on fabric that stretched under strain. Above, the bridge loomed, indifferent, its beams catching the faint roll of thunderclouds. Damien Voss and Briggs Keller turned away, convinced the river would finish what they had begun. Their footsteps faded, hollow on steel, leaving behind only the churn of water and the stubborn fight of a dog against a current. Atlas angled toward the seam of flow where turbulence eased for a heartbeat before surging again. He knew these places, not by calculation, but by memory of rivers smelled, of mud tasted, of currents learned through scars. He pulled Nathan into one of these eddies, his chest heaving as he forced them both sideways toward shallows. Every stroke was agony, every kick a refusal, but hope threaded itself through the struggle. Nathan, half conscious, felt the upward tug again and again, each time believing it would end, each time discovering it continued. The world around him was soundless except for the rush in his ears. But through it, he sensed a vow older than language. Atlas's lungs screamed. His muscles trembled with fatigue. Yet his grip did not loosen. He shifted once more, pulling Nathan's head above water, pushing him toward the faint smear of grass at the bank. Eli Turner had spent most of his 60 years on work sites where steel met sweat, where bricks rose in lines under the weight of his hands, and where silence was more comfortable than unnecessary words. His back had bowed a little with the years. His knees complained whenever the weather shifted, but his eyes were still sharp. That night, he and his nephew Caleb walked the gravel path that skirted the river, carrying a coil of rope in the truck bed for hauling scrap from the yard. They were heading home when the storm began to gather above, restless thunder murmuring over the horizon. Caleb, 15 and restless, dragged a stick along the fence as he walked. He had grown tall too quickly, his joints loose, his voice cracking at odd times. His freckles glowed faintly in the dim light, and though he often filled the air with jokes, there was a weight behind his laughter these days. His older brother had gone to war a year earlier, returned broken in ways that made silence linger at the dinner table. Caleb had learned not to speak of it, but worry hung inside him like an anchor. That was why he came down to the bridge some evenings, hoping the quiet of the river might swallow his unease. On this night, it was not quiet that greeted them, but the echo of a dog's bark, sharp, insistent, carrying a tone that made Eli's skin prickle. It wasn't the territorial warning bark of a stray, nor the playful cry of some backyard hound. This bark was urgent, commanding, a signal torn from desperation. Caleb stopped, his stick falling from his hand. "Uncle," he whispered, eyes scanning the darkness. "That's near the bridge." Eli turned his head, listening. He knew the language of hammers, of saws, of stone cracking under pressure. But he also knew when a sound carried a plea. He broke into a heavy stride toward the noise, Caleb scrambling after him. As they reached the slope of the embankment, their flashlight beam cut across the water, and both of them froze. There, in the furious churn of the river, a dark figure fought against the current. At first, Caleb thought it was only the dog, jaws locked onto something unseen. Then the beam caught the pale flicker of a human face, half submerged, bound in ropes, head thrashing weakly above the water. "My God," Eli muttered, his heart stuttering in his chest. "Someone's drowning. It's pulling him under." Caleb's voice cracked high, the pitch of both fear and youth colliding. "Uncle, the dog, he's holding him." Eli dropped to one knee, yanking the rope coil from his shoulder. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory from years on construction sites where knots could mean life or death. He looped one end around a signpost driven deep into the earth, cinched it tight, and tested the pull with his weight. Caleb hovered, breath shuddering, desperate to leap forward. "Stay up here," Eli commanded. But Caleb shook his head violently. "No, I can get down closer." "He won't reach it from up here." Before Eli could argue, the boy was already scrambling down the muddy slope, sneakers slipping, hands grasping at reeds. His jeans streaked brown with each stumble, but he didn't slow. The dog's barks echoed again, louder, rough with exertion, as though demanding their help. Atlas held Nathan's shirt in his jaws, teeth buried deep into the soaked fabric, muscles trembling with the force of the current. His body strained, eyes burning with the effort to keep the soldier's head above the water. The river tugged, furious, unwilling to surrender its prize. When the flashlight's glow cut across him, Atlas flicked his gaze toward it, just for a heartbeat. Amber eyes blazing, a plea sharp as any human cry. Eli hurled the rope. The coil hissed through rain and air, unfurling in an arc. It slapped the water near Atlas but drifted short, swirling away. Eli cursed under his breath, reeling it back with quick pulls. His arms shook from the effort, age biting at his joints, but determination steeled his motions. "Again!" Caleb shouted, voice high and cracking. "You can do it!" The second throw sliced farther, landing just ahead of Atlas. The shepherd's ears twitched, his head jerking. He shifted Nathan's weight, dragging the man in a slow circle until his jaws snapped onto the rope. His teeth closed, holding both fabric and lifeline together, refusing to release either. "Pull!" Eli barked, bracing himself. Caleb waded knee-deep into the shallows, mud sucking at his shoes, his hands latching onto the rope beside his uncle's. The boy's thin arms strained, veins rising, shoulders quivering, yet his face held the fierce resolve of someone who refused to let another soul vanish before his eyes. The rope went taut, jerking Atlas sideways, dragging him toward the bank. Nathan's body followed, limp, bobbing, face pale as bone beneath the spray. For one terrifying moment, his head sank beneath the water again, bubbles breaking the surface in a rush. Caleb's heart lunged into his throat. "He's going under!" But Atlas kicked furiously, hauling upward, forcing Nathan's mouth back into air. A muffled cough rattled against the tape, a sound fragile but alive. That single sound pushed Eli and Caleb harder, their bodies arching as they pulled inch by inch against the raging current. "Don't you quit on me," Eli growled, teeth clenched, muscles screaming. "Not tonight." The world collapsed into rhythm, Atlas kicking, ropes straining, two strangers pulling with everything they had. Inch by inch, the river surrendered. Mud sucked at Caleb's shoes as he stumbled farther in, water rising to his thighs. He reached, fingers outstretched, and caught Nathan's arm. The skin was cold, slick, frighteningly still. Caleb clamped harder, voice breaking. "I've got him! Uncle, I've got him!" Together, they dragged Nathan onto the slope, the soldier's body collapsing against the wet grass. The rope slithered loose, Atlas scrambling beside them, chest heaving, jaws finally releasing the torn shirt. For a moment, all three stared down at the figure sprawled between them. Nathan lay motionless, lips bluish beneath the tape. His chest did not rise. Caleb's stomach twisted with panic. He's not! Eli ripped the tape from Nathan's mouth with a single savage motion. The sound was harsh, cruel against skin, but necessary. For a breathless instant, silence reigned. Then Nathan's chest convulsed, water spraying as he coughed, gagged, then coughed again, choking but alive. His eyes rolled back, then fluttered open just enough to meet the blur of faces above him. Caleb gasped, relief rushing through his narrow frame. "He's breathing. Uncle, he's breathing." Eli's knees hit the mud with a thud. His hand pressed against Nathan's neck, feeling the flutter of a pulse weak but present. His chest sagged, his face softening with disbelief. "By God, the man's alive." Atlas lowered his head, muzzle nudging Nathan's shoulder once, then again, insistent. Water dripped from his coat in rivulets, his breath came harsh, but his eyes never left the soldier's face. Caleb reached out with trembling fingers, stroking the dog's soaked fur. "Good boy," he whispered, voice shaking. "You saved him. You really saved him." The storm growled overhead, rain hammering against the river and soaking them to the bone. Yet none of them moved away. The boy, the old mason, and the stray shepherd crouched together over the man who had been marked for death, their breaths rising and falling in ragged unison. For Nathan, Each inhale was agony, ribs burning, lungs raw, but air still filled him. Consciousness flickered like a candle in wind. But even in that fragile state, he felt the press of fur against his side, the steady thrum of loyalty anchoring him to the world. He was not alone. Against every intention of those who had cast him away, he was not alone. The truck rattled over the dirt road, its headlights cutting through sheets of rain that refused to yield. Eli kept both hands tight on the wheel, the coil of rope still damp in the back. While Caleb pressed against the passenger door, one arm braced around Nathan's shoulders to keep the wounded man from sliding. Nathan was barely conscious, his head lolling against the seat, water dripping steadily from his hair onto Caleb's jeans. Every cough sounded like a stone being dragged through his chest. But each one was proof of breath, proof of life. Atlas rode in the open bed behind them, drenched, standing rather than lying, his amber eyes fixed on the soldier as if tethering him to the world by sheer vigilance. The farmhouse appeared after a bend in the road, its outline softened by rain. It stood a little apart from the village, built of weathered wood and stone, its roof sagging in places, but its windows glowing faintly with the stubborn warmth of oil lamps. To Caleb it always looked lonely, though not unloved. He knew the woman who lived there, Martha Ellison. Everyone in town did. Martha had lived 7 decades on land that bore her family's sweat in every fence post and orchard tree. She had outlived her husband, outlived 2 brothers, and outlived the kind of grief that might have broken someone less stubborn. She kept her fields in order, her animals fed, and her name, her own. She didn't open her door easily, but Eli knew her well enough to trust she would not turn away a man half drowned. The truck crunched to a stop in front of the porch. Eli climbed out, joints stiff, and swung the door wide. Rain poured in as Caleb struggled with Nathan's weight. Together, uncle and nephew lifted him, arms hooked under shoulders, and half carried, half dragged him toward the porch. Atlas leapt from the truck bed in one fluid motion, landing heavily, mud splashing beneath his paws. He darted ahead, then back, circling them with restless energy, unwilling to let Nathan leave his sight. The porch light flicked on just as Eli raised his fist to knock. A woman's voice called through the wood, steady, no nonsense. "Who's out there at this hour?" "It's Eli Turner," he answered, raising his voice over the storm. "We've got a man half drowned. Needs tending now." The lock clicked. The door opened, revealing Martha framed by the warm glow of the lamp. Her hair, long turned silver, was tied back in a braid, and her frame, though bent, still carried a strength that spoke of years hauling hay and mending fences. Lines marked her face, but her eyes, sharp, blue-gray, steady, were quick to narrow when she saw the soaked strangers. "What in God's name?" she began. But the words stopped when Nathan coughed violently, body shuddering against Eli's hold. Her lips tightened. "Bring him in." The kitchen smelled faintly of herbs and wood smoke. Eli and Caleb lowered Nathan onto the old couch near the stove, the soldier's chest heaving as he tried to draw air deeper than a shallow gasp. Martha fetched towels without another word, her hands moving with brisk certainty. She cut the rope binding his wrists, tore away the shredded remains of tape from his face, and pressed cloth against the bruises that darkened beneath his skin. Her touch was firm, practical, not gentle, but not cruel. "You found him in the river?" she asked, her tone clipped. "Thrown there," Eli said grimly. He glanced at Caleb, who sat close, eyes wide, shirt soaked through. "Would have been gone if not for the dog." At that word, Martha's gaze flicked to the doorway. Atlas stood there, dripping water onto her wooden floor, his body blocking the entrance as though he owned the threshold. His ears twitched, his chest expanded and fell in sharp rhythm, but his stance was immovable. No one entered, no one left without passing through him. Martha frowned. That stray again. She had seen him near the river before, pacing like a shadow. Folks in town muttered about him, half afraid, half admiring. She had never liked the thought of animals roaming without masters, too wild, too unpredictable. Yet now, when her eyes met his, she found not wildness, but a focus that unsettled her. He did not look at her with hunger or plea. He looked as though he was guarding the soldier with the same right she claimed over her own house. He pulled him from the water, Caleb said softly, as if defending Atlas before she could speak further. His young voice carried awe, still trembling from the fear of almost losing Nathan. Held him up until we got the rope. I swear it, Aunt Martha. I saw it. The old woman's eyes lingered on the shepherd, scanning the scars across his flank, the mud streaking his legs, the water dripping from his coat. He was no pampered pet. Yet the boy's words, the way Atlas never moved from the door, the intensity in those amber eyes, it all pressed against her disbelief. Nathan stirred, a groan shuddering through him. His lips cracked as he tried to speak, but only a broken sound escaped. Martha leaned down, pressing a hand against his forehead. Heat radiated through his skin, fever threatening already from the ordeal. She sighed, weary but resolute. He'll need clean bandages, hot broth, rest, and someone to sit watch tonight. I'll stay, Caleb blurted, too quick, eager. Eli laid a heavy hand on his shoulder. I'll keep the first watch, the older man said, his voice gentler. He looked at Martha. Thank you. I know you didn't ask for this, but spare me thanks, she cut in. Her eyes softened just a fraction as she straightened. A man thrown into a river is no stray dog to be ignored. He'll have a place by this fire until he can stand. At her words, Atlas shifted, stepping fully inside at last. He shook himself once, water spraying, then lowered onto his haunches directly at the threshold, chest squared, head high. The gesture was clear. He had no intention of moving farther in, but he would not leave the line he had chosen to guard. Martha watched him a long moment. Against her own habits, against the complaints she had muttered for years about dogs wandering too close to her hens, she felt something stir. Perhaps it was the memory of her husband, who had once sworn that loyalty was clearest in animals. Perhaps it was the way Caleb's hand rested unconsciously on the shepherd's damp fur. Or perhaps it was simply the truth standing before her. This animal had dragged a man back from death. She turned away, busying herself with broth on the stove. But in the quiet between thunder and coughs, she whispered, not quite to herself, "Stray or not, you've earned your place tonight." The farmhouse was hushed, its silence broken only by the storm's retreat into distant rumbles and the ragged breathing of the man stretched across the couch. The oil lamp flickered against the walls, casting a glow over Nathan's pale features. He shifted restlessly, trapped in fevered dreams that tangled memory and pain into one. Sweat beaded across his brow, dampening the bandages Martha had wrapped, and his lips moved in fragments of words that barely formed sound. Caleb sat nearby, his chin in his hands, watching with wide eyes. He had never seen anyone hover so close to death and yet cling with such stubborn strength. He leaned forward when Nathan's cracked voice stumbled out again, weak but insistent. 70, 3, 2, 4, 2. The boy frowned. "Uncle Eli," he whispered, tugging his uncle's sleeve. "He's saying numbers, over and over." Eli rubbed his jaw, weathered eyes narrowing as he leaned closer. The syllables tumbled again from Nathan's lips, broken but certain. 73, 242. The numbers carried weight, not random mutterings, but a code etched deep enough to claw its way out of delirium. Martha, standing near the stove, stilled at the sound. She had been steeping herbs for fever, the scent of mint and chamomile filling the room, but her mind caught sharp on those numbers. She had lived long enough to know the difference between nonsense and obsession. A man doesn't whisper numbers in the grip of fever unless they matter. She set the kettle down and turned, her eyes meeting Eli's. "Write them," she said firmly. "Numbers like that aren't accident. There's something he needs remembered." Caleb scrambled for a scrap of paper, scribbling as Martha repeated aloud. 73, 2, 4, 2. He underlined it twice, as if anchoring the mystery in ink. Nathan stirred again, a low groan tearing through his chest. His hands twitched as though fighting invisible restraints. For a moment his breathing hitched, rapid, panicked. Atlas, lying at the foot of the couch, rose immediately. The shepherd padded forward, pressing his weight gently against Nathan's side, and lowered his head onto the soldier's chest. The effect was near instant. Nathan's frantic breath slowed, caught by the steady rhythm of the dog's presence. His hand, weak and trembling, lifted until his fingers brushed through damp fur. And though he did not wake, his body eased enough that the fevered restlessness softened. Caleb stared, awed. "He calms him," the boy murmured. Martha, who had always insisted dogs were trouble, felt her chest tighten at the sight. She would not speak it aloud, but the shepherd seemed more healer than stray in that moment. Hours later, when the fever broke enough for fragments of lucidity to return, Nathan opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, lids heavy, but awareness flickered there. He struggled to sit, but Eli pushed a hand against his shoulder. "Easy. You're safe here." Nathan's throat rasped. "Safe?" He coughed, each spasm sharp enough to twist his face. Martha brought a cup of water, tilting it carefully to his lips. He drank, sputtered, then managed a hoarse whisper. "Not if they know I'm alive." "Who?" Eli asked, steady but urgent. "Who put you in that river?" Nathan's gaze darted, as if shadows lingered even in the lamplight. His chest rose shallowly, his voice rasping as if dragging the words into existence. "Damien Voss," he said, each syllable a drop of poison. He owns half the city, his hands, in every contract, every deal. But behind it," he faltered, breath catching. Atlas nudged his chest again, anchoring him, and Nathan's trembling eased just enough to continue. "Behind it, a system. Shell companies. Paper trails no one was meant to find. But I saw them." His eyes unfocused, recalling endless ledgers, lines of numbers that sang corruption in their rhythm. 73, 242. It's a code, account reference, proof of the laundering. Eli and Martha exchanged a glance heavy with realization. This wasn't a random beating or robbery. This was an execution attempt, ordered by a man with the power to bury anyone who threatened his empire. Nathan's voice cracked. "I thought I could bring it forward, make them answer. But he knew. Damien always knows. They took me, Briggs and the others, held me until—" His words collapsed into silence, his strength spent. Martha tightened the blanket around him, her hands brisk but gentle. She had buried too many truths in her lifetime to mistake the weight of this one. A conspiracy that reached into banks and contracts, protected by men willing to kill without hesitation. And now, it had landed in her farmhouse, soaking her couch, bleeding into her towels, breathing raggedly in her care. "You'll rest now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Whatever truth you carry will keep until you're strong enough to stand with it." Nathan wanted to protest, to insist there wasn't time, but his body betrayed him. His eyes fluttered closed again, too heavy to fight. Atlas shifted closer, curling himself along the couch's edge, his head still resting on Nathan's chest. His ears twitched at every creak of the farmhouse, his eyes half closed but never unwatchful. Every time Nathan stirred in fear, the shepherd pressed his weight firmer, a silent promise. "You're not alone in this fight." Martha returned to her chair, folding her arms tightly across her chest. She told herself she had no place in conspiracies, no interest in numbers that meant nothing to her. Yet the image of that drowning man and the steady recitation of the code burned into her thoughts. She was no fool. Secrets like this did not wash up at one's doorstep without changing the ground beneath. Morning light spilled through the farmhouse windows, soft and pale after a night of storms. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and simmering broth. Martha moved quietly through the kitchen, careful not to stir Nathan's rest. Eli had gone back to the village for supplies, leaving Caleb outside tending to the hens. Only Atlas kept his station, stretched at the foot of the couch, ears twitching at every subtle shift of the wounded man's breath. It was in this hush that Beatrice Lane arrived. She came walking the path from the village, her figure upright despite the years that had bowed many of her peers. She was in her mid-40s, tall and straight-backed, her dark hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, her dress plain, her shoes sturdy. A stack of graded papers filled the satchel on her shoulder, though she rarely carried them beyond the schoolhouse. Beatrice Lane was known for her precision, every button fastened, every word measured. Students feared her sharp corrections, but many later spoke of her with respect, remembering how she had demanded the best of them when they had not believed they had much to give. Her life was solitary by choice. The small cottage she kept was lined with books and chalkboards, her evenings quiet, her routine steady. Few knew that beneath the surface of that disciplined life ran a quiet ache, a family fractured long ago, a half-brother lost to circumstance. She rarely spoke of it. The years had trained her to seal that wound behind order and silence. Martha greeted her at the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "You're early," she remarked. "I heard there was trouble," Beatrice replied, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Eli stopped by on his way through the village. Said you had taken someone in." Martha hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Come see for yourself." The smell of herbs met Beatrice as she entered. Her eyes adjusted to the dim light, settling first on the couch. Nathan lay there, pale and worn, bandages wrapped across his chest and arms. His breathing was shallow but steady. Atlas lifted his head as she entered, his gaze sharp as if measuring her intent. Beatrice froze, her composure faltering for the first time in years. Her eyes locked not on his face, but on his hand resting loosely against the blanket. A silver ring caught the light, simple, unadorned, worn smooth by time, and etched faintly along its surface were the letters, M. Cole. Her heart jolted, sharp and unsteady. The name struck a chord buried so deep she had almost forgotten how it sounded in her own thoughts. Cole, the name of the father who had lived one life with her mother, then another beyond her reach. She had known of a boy born from that second life, but he had vanished from all records after their father died. She had spent years wondering if he existed anywhere beyond rumor, if he had survived the scatter of choices that had broken their family apart. Her steps carried her forward before thought caught up. She reached down, trembling fingers brushing the ring as though it might vanish if not touched. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice breaking its usual firmness. Nathan stirred at her touch. His eyes fluttered open, gray clouded, but searching. For a moment he seemed to drift between worlds. Then he focused on her face. Confusion flickered, then something else. Recognition not of memory, but of blood. Martha watched, her brow furrowing. "Beatrice?" Beatrice's throat tightened. "This ring belonged to our father," she said softly, never taking her eyes from Nathan. "He gave it to his son, my brother." She swallowed hard, voice trembling now with certainty. "This man is Nathan Cole." The name filled the room like a chord struck on a piano, final, undeniable. Nathan blinked, his breath catching. His lips parted, voice rasping weak. "Beatrice?" She staggered back a step, one hand covering her mouth. To hear her own name on his tongue, spoken with the familiarity of family, it unraveled years of silence in an instant. Tears welled, unbidden, burning against her composure. She sank to her knees beside the couch, taking his hand in both of hers. "I thought you were gone," she whispered. "I thought I would never find you." His fingers tightened faintly around hers, the strength of a man clinging to life, yet unwilling to let go of this sudden thread of belonging. "I didn't know if anyone was left," he breathed. "I didn't know I still had a sister." Martha turned away to the stove, giving them the dignity of privacy, though her own eyes shone. Caleb, peeking through the doorway, felt something rise in his chest. He couldn't name, as if witnessing a piece of the world stitching itself whole. Atlas lowered his head again onto Nathan's chest, watching the exchange with steady eyes. To him, words meant little. But the shift in Nathan's breathing, the calm returning with every touch of his sister's hand, spoke clearer than language. The shepherd pressed closer, as if to anchor both siblings in this fragile reunion. Beatrice held Nathan's hand as though she might lose it if she loosened her grip. Her voice steadied, though it carried the tremor of emotion. "You carry his ring. That means you carry more than just his name. It means the blood in your veins is the same as mine. We are family, Nathan. No matter how the years scattered us, no matter what was taken." His eyes closed, a tear slipping free. "Family," he echoed, the word tasting both foreign and sacred. In that moment, the farmhouse seemed to breathe differently. The storm outside had passed, the light stronger now, breaking across fields that stretched beyond the river. Inside, two lives that had once moved like strangers were bound again by the simplest truth, that they were not alone in the world. Martha set a bowl of broth quietly on the table, her expression gentler than usual. She had opened her door for a drowning man, but what sat before her now was more than a rescue. It was the mending of a family thought lost. The farmhouse kitchen became the heart of everything, its table now covered not with bread and preserves, but with scraps of paper, pens borrowed from Caleb's school bag, and the weight of secrets too heavy for such a humble space. The oil lamp hissed faintly, throwing a circle of light that caught the tension on every face. Martha stood by the stove, her arms folded, her posture stiff, while Eli leaned with both hands on the table. Caleb sat on the edge of his chair, bouncing one leg in nervous rhythm. Nathan, pale and weak, reclined against a pillow on the couch, while Atlas lay stretched at his feet, ears twitching, gaze locked on every movement like a sentinel carved of flesh and will. Beatrice sat at the center, a stack of notes before her, her hair falling loose from its tie as she bent over the scribbled numbers Caleb had copied down. She had been silent for a long time, her brow furrowed, lips moving faintly as she whispered sequences under her breath. Numbers had always been her language, steadier than the unreliable chaos of life. She could coax patterns from what looked meaningless. And tonight those patterns whispered a truth more sinister than any algebraic proof she had taught her students. 73, 2, 4, 2, she murmured again, tapping her pencil against the page. It isn't random. It isn't even a simple code. It's a reference system. She looked up, eyes narrowing with certainty. He was remembering ledger entries. This is how they mask the flow of money. Nathan stirred, his voice rough. Contracts, offshore accounts. They're not real projects. Just shells. His breathing hitched, and Atlas immediately nudged closer, his head pressing lightly against Nathan's ribs. The soldier exhaled, steadied by the dog's presence, then continued. Damien runs everything through false bids, construction, shipping, even hospital supplies. Each contract tied to a code. I traced one. I traced this one. He coughed, pain seizing him, but his eyes burned with the need to be heard. It leads to millions. Stolen, washed, turned clean. Beatrice's pencil scratched furiously, mapping the numbers into columns. He split amounts into microtransfers, scattered through dummy firms. To the untrained eye, it looks like bureaucratic clutter. But when you align them... She turned the paper, showing Eli and Martha a sequence that curved into shocking clarity. It's theft dressed as commerce. Damien Voss has built his fortune on fraud. And worse, he's made it untouchable by hiding behind the sheer size of the system. Eli swore under his breath, shaking his head. And when you tried to bring it forward, they came for me. Nathan rasped, eyes closing briefly. Briggs, the others. They tied me, dragged me to the bridge. Damien said no court would ever see me alive. His hand twitched against the blanket. Atlas pressed closer, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Not anger at Nathan, but at the memory that stirred him. Silence pressed heavy over the table. The storm outside had passed, but a greater storm now lived within these walls. Every person present knew what it meant to hold knowledge like this. It was not a secret that could be locked in a drawer and forgotten. It was a brand that marked them all. Martha was the first to break it. Her voice was calm, but the iron beneath it was unmistakable. Then we don't let him finish what he started. This man stays alive. These numbers stay safe. If Voss thinks he's drowned his truth in the river, he's mistaken. Beatrice met her gaze, a quiet understanding passing between two women who had carried heavy burdens in different ways. We'll need to keep copies. Multiple, hidden. If they come again, the truth cannot be silenced with one fire or one death. I can help, Caleb said quickly, his young face alight with determination. I can hide them at school, in my locker. No one would think to look. Eli shook his head, though not without pride. We'll think of something safer than a school locker, boy. But your spirit's in the right place. Nathan's voice rasped again, weak but steady. If we protect the records, we protect more than me. We protect every man and woman who's been cheated by his schemes. He turned his head toward Beatrice, his eyes shadowed but resolute. He has men everywhere. He'll come. But he can't take what he doesn't know we've safeguarded. Martha moved to Nathan's side, adjusting the blanket, her hand lingering at his brow. You'll rest now, she said softly, but her eyes betrayed her resolve. We'll handle the rest. Atlas shifted, rising to his feet. He padded to the doorway, turned once, then settled again directly across the threshold. His body filled the space like a drawn line. His chest rose and fell slowly, ears attuned to every creak, every distant call of the night. To the humans around the table, the decision felt heavy, frightening, uncertain. But to him, the choice was simple. Nothing and no one would pass into this farmhouse to harm the soldier while he still drew breath. Caleb whispered, almost reverently, "It's like he knows. He's guarding us." "He's more than guarding," Eli said quietly, watching the shepherd's silhouette against the faint light of dawn. "That dog's a shield made flesh." Beatrice's pencil stilled. She looked from Nathan, breathing uneven but alive, to Atlas, silent and immovable, and then to her sister-in-law, Martha, whose weathered hands clenched around the teacup. For the first time in years, she felt a strange, fragile hope rising among the fear that perhaps together, with truth in ink and loyalty in fur and blood, they might stand against the empire Damien had built. The farmhouse exhaled into silence again. Beyond the fields, the sun was lifting, painting the river in light. But inside, they all understood. Night was not behind them. Night was coming. The evening descended with a deceptive calm. The farmhouse glowed with lamplight, its windows casting warm squares across the grass, while the river murmured quietly beyond the trees. Inside, Nathan dozed with his chest rising more evenly than it had in days, Beatrice sitting nearby with a book unopened in her lap, Martha at the stove preparing tea, Eli on a chair carving at a block of wood, and Caleb pretending to study but sneaking glances at the man on the couch. Atlas lay close to Nathan's feet, his head heavy on his paws, eyes half shut but never truly asleep. The shepherd was the first to sense it. His ears pricked sharply, muscles tightening beneath his scarred coat. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, catching a scent carried faintly through the evening air. Oil, rubber, sweat thick with adrenaline. He rose, tail stiff, and padded to the doorway. A low rumble built in his chest, a sound that made Caleb glance up instantly. "What is it, boy?" the boy whispered. Before anyone could answer, Atlas barked, deep, sharp, commanding. It was not the bark of warning children away from kittens or sparrows. It was the bark of battle. His hackles bristled, his body drawn tall, his gaze locked on the gravel road that wound toward the house. Martha froze at the stove. Eli set the carving knife down with a heavy thud. Beatrice's book slid forgotten to the floor. Caleb's breath caught as headlights crested the path, bouncing across the farmhouse walls. The growl of an engine rolled closer, loud against the stillness. "They've come," Nathan rasped from the couch, forcing himself upright, though pain carved lines across his face. "Damien doesn't let loose ends live." The vehicle halted just outside, its tires crunching into wet gravel. Doors slammed, one after another, heavy with intent. The night filled with the muffled thud of boots striking earth. Through the window, Eli glimpsed them first. Travis Cole, tall and lean, his face sharpened by cruelty. Derek Shaw, wiry with restless eyes. Leon Briggs, broad-shouldered, his jaw clenched, his body carrying the memory of pushing Nathan into the river. And though Damien himself was not among them, his presence weighed in the air through these three, the embodiment of his order. Atlas erupted in furious barking, his body lunging forward until he stood squarely in front of the door, chest expanded, teeth flashing in the lamplight. He was not merely warning. He was declaring ownership. This was his ground, his charge, and he would not yield. Caleb scrambled to the phone mounted on the wall. His fingers trembled but found the dial, his voice cracking as he shouted into the receiver. "Sheriff's office! Men at the farm, send help now!" The dispatcher's voice was faint through the crackling line, promising assistance. But even as Caleb pleaded, headlights cut and boots crunched closer. There was no time. Eli gripped the heavy wooden chair he had been sitting on, his knuckles white. "We'll hold until they get here," he said, steady and grim. Beatrice stood, her body rigid, but her gaze unwavering. She moved to Nathan's side, pressing him back down despite his protest. "You'll only bleed out faster if you stand," she hissed, her voice sharper than fear. "Trust us now. Trust the dog." The knock that came rattled the door, not with politeness, but with command. Travis's voice followed, oily with menace. "Evening, folks. We're here for what belongs to Mr. Voss. Make this easy, and nobody has to get hurt." Atlas barked so violently the door shook. His claws scraped wood as he pressed against it, every muscle coiled like a drawn bow. Martha's voice rose, steady, fierce. "This is my home. You've no right to it. Leave now." Derek's laughter slithered through the cracks. "Lady, you've got something that doesn't belong to you. Hand over the soldier and the papers, and maybe we let the rest of you sleep through the night." Nathan tried again to rise, fury burning through his exhaustion. But Atlas shoved against his chest with the weight of his head, pressing him down firmly. The gesture was almost human, an order to stay, to trust, to survive. Nathan's eyes closed, tears stinging from the helplessness of it. But he obeyed. The first blow struck the door. Wood groaned under the impact. Caleb flinched, gripping the phone as if it could protect him. Eli positioned himself with the chair raised like a weapon, his jaw set. Martha seized the iron poker from the stove, holding it high, her face carved with resolve. Beatrice pressed herself between Nathan and the window, shielding him with the only body she had. Another crash. The hinges screamed. Atlas erupted forward, hurling his body into the door as if his weight alone could hold back the force. His growl deepened, primal, filling the room with a sound that made even Caleb's heart tremble. The men outside shouted, emboldened by numbers, but wary of what waited inside. Leon's voice cut through, low and furious. "Move aside the mutt. He's nothing but a stray." "Nothing but a stray," Atlas snarled, teeth bared, body vibrating with defiance. To him this was no stranger's house, no temporary refuge. This was his ground. These were his people. Nathan was his soldier, Beatrice his blood, Martha his shelter, Eli his ally, Caleb his charge. The label of stray no longer fit. He was shield, he was sentinel, he was the line that darkness would not cross. The third blow cracked the frame. Splinters flew. Martha tightened her grip on the poker. Eli raised the chair higher. Caleb pressed the phone harder to his ear, begging the dispatcher to hurry. And through it all, Atlas stood immovable, his bark like thunder, his eyes blazing with the vow of a creature who had chosen his pack. Outside, Travis barked orders. Inside, fear and courage braided into one. The night held its breath, balanced on the edge of violence. The door gave way in a shower of splinters, and with it came the rush of boots, the stench of sweat, metal, and gasoline. Travis Cole shoved forward first, broad shoulders barging through the threshold, his knife flashing in the glow of the lamp. Derek Shaw slid in close behind him, wiry and restless, his own blade glinting as his eyes darted across the room. Leon Briggs loomed at the rear, his presence as heavy as an iron door closing. The farmhouse, once a sanctuary of warmth, became a battlefield in an instant. Atlas moved before thought had a chance to breathe. The shepherd hurled his body at Derek, a blur of fur and muscle, his jaws clamping onto the man's wrist. The knife clattered against the floorboards, skittering beneath the table as Derek screamed and staggered back, trying to wrench free. Atlas dug deeper, teeth sinking just enough to hold, his body twisting to drive the man off balance. Caleb scrambled to grab the fallen blade, his hands shaking but determined as he kicked it across the floor out of reach. Travis lunged toward the couch, toward Nathan. But Eli was there, swinging the wooden chair like a weapon. The crash echoed as wood splintered against Travis's shoulder, driving him sideways with a snarl. "Not in this house," Eli growled, bracing himself for another swing. Martha stood at the stove, the iron poker raised, her face carved with fierce defiance. She jabbed it toward Leon, who ducked but hesitated, unwilling to test the full weight of a woman who looked more like a general than a widow in that moment. Nathan pushed himself up from the couch, pain flashing across his face. Every muscle screamed. But something deeper than injury carried him. He limped forward, leaning on the wall for support, until he reached the porch where the night air poured in through the shattered doorframe. The headlights of the truck outside cast long shadows, and in one of them stood Damien Voss. Damien had not entered with his men. He lingered just beyond the chaos, his suit immaculate, his expression composed, as if violence were merely another contract executed on his behalf. His gaze locked on Nathan, and for the first time, surprise flickered across his perfect mask. "You should be at the bottom of the river," Damien said coldly. Nathan straightened as much as his battered body allowed, his voice rough but unyielding. "You can kill me," he rasped, "but the truth has already slipped from your grasp. The proof exists, and it will destroy you." Damien's eyes narrowed, fury threading through his calm. He gestured to his men with a flick of his hand. "End it." Derek, still locked in Atlas's grip, cried out as the shepherd wrenched his arm sideways, the knife hand useless now. Travis shoved Eli back with brute force, his fists swinging, but Eli met him blow for blow, grunting with the strength of a man who had lifted stone his entire life. Leon pushed forward, trying to reach Nathan, but Martha blocked him with the poker, striking his shoulder hard enough to make him curse. Caleb, pale but brave, grabbed another chair and held it out like a shield, his eyes blazing with fear and courage mingled. Atlas released Derek with a final snap, sending him stumbling into the wall, and spun immediately to place himself between Nathan and the intruders. His body lowered, teeth bared, a growl rattling through his chest like distant thunder. Every muscle quivered, ready to launch again. Nathan leaned heavily against the door frame, but his hand rested on Atlas's back, steadying himself not only with strength, but with loyalty. The farmhouse rang with the clash of bodies and the hiss of breath. Nathan's words still lingered in the air, a challenge that had cut through the violence like steel. Damien, standing outside with headlights haloing his figure, clenched his jaw, but gave no order to retreat yet. Then, faint but unmistakable, another sound rose beyond the chaos, the sharp wail of a siren. At first distant, it grew steadily louder, cutting through the night with its promise of law and consequence. Travis froze, his fist half raised. Derek staggered upright, clutching his wounded arm. Leon backed toward the door, eyes darting. They knew what it meant. Their window was closing. Damien's mask cracked just enough to reveal frustration. His empire thrived in shadows, not under flashing blue lights. He stepped forward once, his voice low and sharp. "This isn't over. You've made yourselves part of something you don't understand. And when the lights leave, so will your protection." Nathan, his breath ragged but steady, stared at him with unbroken resolve. "You're wrong," he said, voice carrying even through the pain. "We understand enough, and you will answer for every name buried in your books." Atlas barked once, sharp and fierce, as if sealing the vow. Damien held his gaze for a long, venomous moment. Then, with a flick of his hand, he signaled his men. Travis, Derek, and Leon retreated quickly, dragging themselves out into the headlights. The truck engine roared, tires spitting gravel as it lurched into the darkness. The sirens grew louder, closer, until red and blue lights washed across the farmhouse walls. Martha lowered the poker. Eli sagged against the broken chair. Caleb dropped his makeshift shield with shaking arms. Beatrice rushed to Nathan's side, her hand bracing his shoulder as his strength finally buckled. But Atlas remained where he stood, framed in the doorway, his chest heaving, his eyes burning after the retreating truck. To him, the battle was not over. He knew the darkness would return, yet for tonight, the house still stood, the soldiers still breathed, and the pack he had chosen was safe. And as the sirens wailed louder, Atlas lifted his head, the glow of the patrol lights dancing across his fur, a living shield waiting for the next storm. The night after the confrontation settled into silence, only when the red and blue lights flooded the farmhouse yard. Sheriff's cruisers lined the gravel road, their beams slicing through the dark like blades. The men who had stormed the house were still within reach of the law's arm. Their truck boxed in before they could disappear into the maze of country roads. The air shook with shouted orders and the sound of boots pounding soil. And in the center of it all stood Captain Harris Whitman. Whitman was a man molded by decades in uniform, his presence filling the space with the certainty of command. His silver hair caught the light, and his jaw carried the kind of lines carved by long nights and heavier choices. He had been sheriff of the county for 20 years, and though corruption sometimes stretched its fingers even into law, Whitman was not a man who bent easily. His eyes found Nathan immediately, pale and wounded, but standing in the doorway with Atlas pressed against his side. "Get the medics up here," Whitman barked, before striding forward. He clasped Nathan's shoulder gently, his voice softening. "You're a hard man to kill, Cole. But you've stirred a nest that runs deeper than you know." Nathan's lips cracked into the faintest of smiles, though his eyes burned with exhaustion. "That's why I need you to see what we've got. It's not just about me. It's about all of it. The contracts, the shell firms, the blood money." Whitman's gaze shifted to Beatrice, who stepped forward, clutching the stack of notes she had pieced together through sleepless hours. Her hands trembled only slightly as she held them out. "Numbers don't lie, Captain. Damian Voss built his empire on paper, and paper leaves trails." The sheriff accepted the documents, his face unreadable, but a spark glimmered in his eyes. "If this is what I think it is, it's not just fraud. It's organized crime hiding under philanthropy." He looked toward the cruiser where Damian Voss, immaculate even in handcuffs, sat with his jaw tight, refusing to acknowledge the stares of the townsfolk who had gathered at a distance. And the higher they build, the harder they fall. The weeks that followed unfolded like a storm breaking over the county. Investigators poured through the records Beatrice and Nathan supplied, tracing lines of deceit through layers of companies, contracts, and false names. Every number matched another, each code another key, until the truth stood naked. Damian Voss had stolen millions, laundering money through projects that never existed, bribing officials, silencing dissent. The courtroom was filled beyond its walls when the trial began. Journalists crowded the benches, townsfolk lined the aisles, the air thick with anticipation. For years, Damian had been untouchable, a benefactor whose name gleamed on plaques and whose donations painted him as a savior. Now he stood accused, his empire stripped to bone. Nathan entered the courtroom in a dark suit borrowed from Eli, his frame still marked by bruises, his gait uneven. Yet there was a steadiness in his eyes as he took his place. Atlas walked at his side, a quiet shadow. The bailiff had raised an eyebrow at first, but after the sheriff himself vouched for the animal's presence, no one argued further. And so Atlas sat, day after day, beside Nathan at the witness bench, his amber eyes sweeping the room, his body a silent bulwark against the ghosts of the river. When Nathan rose to testify, the courtroom hushed. His voice was rough, still bearing the gravel of wounds, but each word carried the weight of survival. He told them of the night he uncovered the coded accounts, of the moment Damien's men bound him, of the push from the bridge, and of the river that tried to claim him. He spoke not with drama, but with the blunt cadence of truth, and every listener leaned forward as though to catch each breath. Beatrice followed, her hand steady as she placed the ledgers before the court. She explained the numbers, her chalkboard precision cutting through the fog of legal jargon. 73,242, she said firmly, tapping the page. This is not random. It is a contract reference connected to a false bid. Trace it, and you will find a transfer routed through 4 shell companies, leading back into Voss's account. Multiply it by hundreds, and you see the empire he built. Her voice, usually sharp in classrooms, carried something softer now, an urgency born of love for the brother who had nearly been erased, and of fury for the lies that had almost silenced him. Damien sat in silence, his lawyers whispering furiously, but his mask slipped as the evidence mounted. Every number Beatrice presented, every memory Nathan offered, struck like hammer blows. And beside them, Atlas never moved, his gaze fixed on the man who had ordered Nathan's death, his presence reminding all that loyalty could outlast even the deepest corruption. Days stretched into weeks. Witnesses came and went, contractors unpaid, officials bought and threatened, clerks who remembered signatures that did not belong. Slowly, the fortress Damien had built crumbled into dust. At the close of arguments, the prosecutor's words echoed through the chamber. No empire built on theft and violence can stand forever. Tonight, justice does not speak only for Nathan Cole. It speaks for every voice Damien Voss silenced, every dollar stolen, every life threatened. And it speaks in the presence of the shepherd who pulled a man from the river, because loyalty cannot be bought and truth cannot be drowned. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, the verdict was clear. Guilty on every count. Damien's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing into slits. But even he could not bend the weight of law. The sentence fell heavy. Decades in prison, his assets seized, his name struck from the marble plaques where it had once shone. The courtroom erupted, half in relief, half in awe that the untouchable had finally been touched. Nathan exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. Beatrice's hand found his, squeezing tightly, tears shining in her eyes. Martha, Eli, and Caleb sat in the gallery, their faces alight with quiet pride. And Atlas, sensing the shift in the room, pressed his head gently against Nathan's knee. The soldier reached down, fingers threading through thick fur, his voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." The gavel struck once more, sealing the judgment. Damien Voss was led away in chains. His empire, once sprawling and untouchable, collapsed into rubble under the weight of numbers and the courage of those who dared to reveal them. And at the center of it all, in every headline and every whisper in the courthouse halls, one image endured. A battered soldier standing with his sister, flanked by a shepherd whose silence had spoken louder than any word. Atlas had not barked in the courtroom, had not lunged or growled. He had simply been there, present, steady, unyielding. And that presence had become a symbol, not just of loyalty to one man, but of the truth itself. That some vows are written not on paper, but in flesh and spirit, unbroken even when the world tries to drown them. The trial ended. The empire fell. Justice, long delayed, had spoken at last. The courthouse emptied, but the echoes of the gavel remained long after Damien Voss had been taken away in chains. For weeks, the newspapers ran his name alongside words like fraud, conspiracy, and guilty on all counts. Yet for Nathan, Beatrice, Martha, Eli, and Caleb, the headlines were only part of the story. Their lives had been altered by something larger than a trial. They had become a family forged in fire. And when the dust settled, they sought not only to survive, but to build. It was Beatrice who first spoke the idea aloud. Sitting at Martha's kitchen table one quiet morning, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup, she said softly, "We've seen what one dog can do for a wounded soldier. What if Atlas's gift wasn't just meant for Nathan?" Nathan, still healing, lifted his gaze from the window. Atlas lay by his side as always, amber eyes steady, the scars across his flank catching light like worn metals. The soldier's lips curved into a slow, thoughtful smile. "You mean a place where others like me could find what I found here? A place where dogs and soldiers walk each other back from the edge?" Martha folded her arms, her expression practical, but her eyes warm. "This old farm has stood through storms, fires, and wars. If you want to give it new life, then let's do it. Let's make it a house where healing lives." And so the Riverside Canine Veteran Center was born. The transformation was gradual, but relentless. Eli and Caleb tore down old fences and built kennels, sturdy yet open, where dogs could run freely but safely. Beatrice coordinated with local shelters, seeking out animals that had been abandoned, scarred, or overlooked. Martha oversaw the kitchen, insisting that every soldier and volunteer who walked through their doors would never leave hungry. Nathan, though still recovering, threw himself into the work with a soldier's discipline. He trained the dogs with patience learned in hardship, teaching them not tricks, but trust. How to sit calmly when a man woke screaming from nightmares. How to lean into someone's shaking hands until the tremor slowed. How to walk at a veteran's side through crowded streets without fear. And through it all, Atlas became the living emblem of what the center stood for. Word spread quickly. Veterans who had once sat in silence, haunted by what they had carried home from distant wars, came tentatively to Riverside. Some limped on crutches, some bore scars hidden beneath sleeves, others carried wounds unseen. At first they stood at the edge of the field, uncertain. Then they saw Atlas, tall, scarred, steady, greeting them with quiet eyes that seemed to say, "I know the dark you've seen. I've stood in it too." The first veteran to stay was Daniel Price, a former medic whose nights had long been broken by memories of the battlefield. Atlas approached him gently, pressing his head against Daniel's palm until the man, trembling, finally let his fingers rest in the dog's fur. In that moment, silence did what no medicine had. It gave permission to breathe again. Others followed. Each man and woman found their match, rescued dogs with their own scars, trained not to erase the past, but to walk through it together. A one-eyed shepherd named Luna became a constant at the side of a Marine who had lost his leg. A timid hound named Scout learned to sleep pressed against the chest of a soldier whose dreams had once left him shaking in empty beds. The farm changed shape. Laughter returned to its fields. The sound of boots on gravel no longer carried menace, but the rhythm of men and women learning to walk with hope again. One evening, months after the verdict, Nathan stood at the edge of the fields as the sun slipped low, pouring gold across the river. The center's kennels hummed with life. Dogs barking, veterans calling, children of volunteers chasing each other in the grass. The farmhouse, once a battlefield, now stood as a sanctuary. Atlas stood beside him, as he always had. The shepherd's ears twitched at the laughter, his body relaxed, but his gaze stayed fixed on Nathan. The soldier rested a hand against the dog's neck, his voice quiet, breaking the hush of twilight. You pulled me from the water when I was already sinking inside. You carried me when I could barely stand. You saved me from the dark, Atlas. His hand tightened, his words heavy with gratitude and promise. Now, together, we'll save others, one life at a time. Atlas lifted his head, pressing it lightly against Nathan's side as if sealing the vow. The evening breeze carried the scent of grass and earth, of bread baking in Martha's oven, of a home rebuilt. Behind them, Beatrice called for supper. Caleb's laughter rang with youth unbroken by fear. Eli's deep voice answered, and Martha's silhouette stood framed in the farmhouse doorway. But in the field's last light, it was Nathan and Atlas, soldier and shepherd, survivor and savior, who embodied what had been born from ruin. A place where loyalty could heal. A place where sacrifice became hope. A place where second chances were not only possible, but promised. The Riverside Canine Veteran Center became more than a farm, more than a project. It became a symbol carried in the hearts of all who stepped across its fields. That loyalty outlasts betrayal. That courage can rise from despair. And that even from the deepest river, life can be pulled into the light again. And at its heart stood a German shepherd with amber eyes, whose silence spoke louder than any words, reminding the world that redemption often comes on four legs and with an unbroken vow.